Hello, welcome back to Real America. I was 16 when the memoir Prozac Nation by Elizabeth Wurtzel was published. The subtitle was Young and Depressed in America, a memoir. It became a best 2001, was adapted into a movie starring Christina Ricci. Although I've never read the book or seen the movie, shockingly, I remember it being everywhere, particularly when I was in rehab 3 years later. In spite of the snarky reviews calling Wurtzel self absorbed, nasal gazing, and exhibitionistic, the memoir was speaking to something going on in America, particularly with young women. Tonight, we're talking psychiatric medications. Are we over medicated? Have medications helped you or someone you know? Have they hurt them? My guest tonight is Laura Delano, author of Unshrunk and the founder of Inner Compass Initiative, a nonprofit organization that helps people make informed choices about psychiatric diagnoses, medications, and medication withdrawal. This is Real America with me, Bridget Phetasy. I saw the trend of depressed and anxious young women firsthand in rehab in 1998. Another thing I saw firsthand was women being put on antidepressants and antipsychotics. They'd often end up drooling in a wheelchair, and it was honestly terrifying. This was after living with a person who was in and out of treatments for bipolar and witnessing them being put on all kinds of different drugs with differing effects when I was a child and teen. Later on in life, when I was working with teens on the spectrum, I watched a psychiatrist would put them on and off all kinds of meds. From what it seemed like to me, everyone was a guinea pig, and no one really knew if these drugs would make things better or worse. They were just trying it out. Then there was the painful withdrawal process before you could even try another drug to help alleviate whatever symptoms they were suffering, and the terrifying in between. If anything, Wurtzel, who passed away in 2020 of breast cancer, was ahead of her time. Things have seemingly only got worse for Americans in terms of our mental health since the late 90s. We are fully living in Prozac Nation now, where influencers are promoting antidepressants on TikTok with cutesy hashtags like Lexapro Talk, Zoloft Gang, and hashtag Live Laugh Lexapro, my personal favorite. In October, the Wall Street Journal published a piece titled Girl, Take Your Crazy Pills. Antidepressants recast as a hot lifestyle accessory, in which the journal analyzed data for content related to antidepressants and found that it has recently exploded. The hashtag antidepressants has surpassed 1.3 billion views according to the data, and searches for Lexapro have more than tripled since 2022. The data also showed that user shares per video tagged SSRI nearly quadrupled from 2022 to 2025. Jonathan Haidt would argue this dramatic rise in depression, anxiety, and antidepressants can be attributed to smartphones and social media creating what he calls an epidemic of mental illness. Like Wurtzel, Haidt appears to have struck a nerve with his book, The Anxious Generation, which also landed on the New York Times bestseller list. I remember being in rehab and they said, Bridget, we think you're depressed. We think you should take some antidepressants. And I said, well, no shit, I'm depressed. I'm 19 years old in rehab coming off heroin. If I am going to take drugs, I'll just start smoking weed again. I realize this is an immature view, but my limited anecdotal experience with medications, what I saw other people going through while they were put on and off of it, was traumatic enough that it made me terrified to go near the stuff, which is hilarious when you consider that I would take pills from strangers and was coming off a year of chasing the dragon. Decades later, when I was dating someone, I found out he was taking meds and I didn't take it well. I freaked out. I shamed him. It's not good behavior. In my mind, underneath the person on meds was a crazy person waiting to come out. I'd only seen medications help people a few times, and it was for a limited time under the direction of a doctor who was giving them the lowest dose possible until they felt better and then slowly tapering them off. It wasn't right of me to even weigh in on what this person I was dating should or shouldn't have been taking, and a big regret of mine is that I caused this person more suffering because of my own past experience with people on meds and the side effects that come with them. Long story short, I've gone from being pretty anti-medication to I'm not a doctor or a shrink, do what's best for you. I don't want people to not get the treatment they need. I don't want people to needlessly suffer, to be medicated like schizophrenics, for example, where the data shows beneficial outcomes when they are most of the time or often. But does everyone who is on meds really need them? Isn't some suffering just part of life? Are they helpful or do they prevent us from finding our own natural baseline? Do they prevent us from truly knowing our vast human capacity and range? Do they limit us to a dull, safe comfort zone? Are the youth trying to medicate their way out of dystopia, as one person commented on Reddit? As I mentioned at the top, my guest tonight is Laura Delano, author of Unshrunk and the founder of Inner Compass Initiative, a nonprofit organization that helps people make informed choices about psychiatric diagnoses, medications, and medication withdrawal. We will be hearing her story and talking about all of this and more tonight. But first, some quick housekeeping. If you want to be called on, you need to be on Zoom, on camera, and you need to virtually raise your hand by clicking the reactions button. If you aren't on Zoom and want to be part of our virtual live audience right now or in the future, click the link in the description below to get the Zoom link or go to tway.tv/Bridget Zoom. The Zoom link is the same every time, so save it somewhere. This is where we'll be your virtual diner. The voice of God you're hearing is Cousin Maggie.
Hello, everyone.
Many of you already know her. She's my cousin and co-producer. We make a lot of stuff together, like other shows, Dumpster Fire, Walk-ins Welcome, and everything else you can find at Phetasy.com, the hub for all of our content. Maggie will be monitoring the chat. If you have something to say and you raise your hand, Maggie will message you privately to find out what you'd like to talk about. She's going to help sure we stay on topic. Please keep an eye out for that if you're raising your hand. We can't guarantee we'll get to everyone, but we do our best. Everyone knows my number one rule is don't be a dick. So please don't be me shaming a man that I'm dating for being on meds. A dick. And now a word from our sponsor, Quest. This time of year, heading into the holidays, I feel so many people stop paying any attention to their health. Doctors' visits are a hassle and something no one wants to think about. That's why I love Quest. Quest simplifies the medical testing process significantly, especially if you're dealing with an HMO like I am, and allows you to get the testing you need done without a doctor's visit. Quest offers over 150 of the same tests trusted by doctors, including diagnostics for specific ailments like STDs, chronic conditions like heart, liver, and kidney disease, as well as testing that is almost never covered by health insurance, like fertility and advanced women's hormone testing. Quest also offers broad packages of tests that go way beyond the standard tests you typically get in an annual medical checkup visit. Concierge medicine and functional medicine doctors charge thousands of dollars for these types of workups. Quest offers them for the price of a night out on the town. And if you're going to have a night out on the town around the holidays, you're going to want to make sure you don't have any STIs or STDs. Your health and well-being is worth it. Visit questhealth.com and use the discount code REALDECEMBER25 and get 20% off your purchase. That's questhealth.com, code REALDECEMBER25 for 20% off. There's a link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube. And now let's get to our guest, the brilliant Laura Delano. Welcome to Real America.
Hey, Bridget. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. I'm excited to have a conversation about our medicated nation. It is funny. Prozac Nation seems so quaint now. It's like she really was ahead of the curve on that one. And that was considered kind of like the peak at the time.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about a year ago on her book, and the fact that it was the 30th year anniversary of it. And her book, I think, was, I wouldn't say single-handedly responsible, but played a significant role in kicking off this medicalized, medicated era that we're now in. She really was the first prominent young voice embracing a medicalized understanding of yourself, by which I mean, you're feeling really depressed, anxious, overwhelmed, spun out, and you're taught to think of these as symptoms of an illness needing treatment. She made it cool. A part of the cultural conversation. And at the time it was this revolutionary thing, like you said, now is just ubiquitous, really. I think we are in, and I appreciate your intro here, and just want to say as well that to me, this is not about medications being good or bad, right or wrong. This is about choice, informed choice, and what does it take to get the information and options that you need so that you can truly choose for yourself, whatever that choice might be, whether to take a medication or to not take one or to come off of one.
I mean, it's interesting because you talk about in your book how you were prescribed them at 13, and now I have a young daughter, and I was thinking about how I would feel if she was feeling anxious and depressed. And when you're a parent, you would do anything to help your kid. And how 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 can you, with all the information you have, how can you know you're doing the right thing or the wrong thing in that moment, especially when it's like a teen who's in distress?
It's so hard. It's so hard. And and I think what happens for a lot of parents is they're understandably terrified by what their kid is going through, and that fear can end up becoming this dominant driving force behind the decisions that they're making. It's certainly what happened to my parents back in the mid 90s. I basically, hit my crisis just as Wurzel and Prozac Nation was, breaking into the scene. As, this 13-year-old girl, I was totally spun out and cutting myself and thinking about death and acting out. And my bewildered parents did lose connection, I think, to their own instincts as my parents because of that fear. And I think for a lot of parents out there who understandably want to help their kids and can't bear to see their kids debilitated by pain, emotional pain, they end up, I think, deferring their own instincts to the professionals that they might be interfacing with who, are also really wanting to help and have really good intentions. And I think part of the challenge here is that because the mental health industry is so ubiquitous in our culture, parents don't often see that there are options beyond it. And they are given a pretty singular story about what their kid is going through that is just one story. And I think that's where I ended up eventually. The point I eventually reached was that I don't want to tell this story of myself anymore, that I have a brain illness needing lifelong meds. I want to make meaning of what I'm going through in a non-medicalized way. And I think a lot of parents want that for their kids too, but maybe don't know how to find that non-medical story or those non-medicalized options because they're just not visible to them.
If you had if your parents had listened to their instincts or not been disconnected from them in a way that you mention, what would that have looked like?
Well, that's the dilemma because I don't think there was anything they could have done that would have worked, so to speak. I think I was hitting puberty. I was waking up to the tyranny of self, to this awareness of myself as a distinct individual in the world who was performing in all these different roles. I don't think my parents could have done anything differently. And that's the dilemma that, growing up is really hard and there is no solution to that sometimes or oftentimes. And I think people often ask, what would have helped? What do you wish you had had instead? And I think in retrospect, the only thing I think I might have been open to was mentorship from older young women, older girls who had been through their own dark nights of the soul and had kind of come through on the other side. I think I would have listened to them. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I would have listened to any adult. That's
Mm-hmm.
was why part of why I was in this mess. I was defying all these power sources I saw in my life, as I think many teens are. It's called
Yeah.
adolescence.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it's only gotten worse for the teens, particularly teen girls. It doesn't seem like, since even you and Wurzel were in your dark night of the soul at 13, now we have rampant, even more, they're on social media, and it's kind of like a status symbol now, how many diagnoses you have and how identified you are with them, which I believe is an extra part of the problem that wasn't quite as bad in the 90s.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think it speaks to the root crisis here, which is a crisis of meaning, I think. And young people are understandably, you know, feeling a lot of angst and despair and frustration over the circumstances of what's or the culture at large. And I think because the mental health industry and its ubiquitous presence in our lives has this monolithic status in defining what suffering means and what it is and what to do about it, young people who are seeking a sense of belonging and self-understanding have gravitated towards these, really enticing stories that say, oh, you feel the way you feel because there's just something wrong with your brain chemicals. You're not a bad person. You're not a lazy person. You're not a fuck up. You're not a failure. You're sick. And here are meds to treat that. And I remember how enticing that story was and how I felt like I belong somewhere. I know who I am. But really at my core, I was struggling with who I was and how I fit into the world. And I think that's what's happening at large now with young people. And you're right. More girls are feeling suicidal than ever before. Nearly 1 in 3 teens between the ages of 12 and 17 are on some kind of medication.
Mhm.
We are in a real crisis of suffering here. But at the same time, more people than ever before are engaged with mental health treatment. So something isn't lining up here. This isn't about lack of access to
Right.
care.
Do they have when you look at those numbers of like 1 in 12 teens are on medications, do they have a profile of a kid that's not on medications? Like what's working?
That is such a good question. And that is a huge issue here is that we basically have a void of, of research that compares long-term outcomes of people on medications. And this is not just with kids, this is with adults as well. That compares long-term medication outcomes and long-term outcomes for people who don't take meds. We don't have much research in that area. Of course, we
Right.
have, studies say that getting sunlight can help with your mental health, and studies say, to me, these are the kinds of things that we really shouldn't need studies for.
Uh-huh.
So there's research looking at, non-medication um, resources for people, but actually tracking and comparing how people do on meds versus not on meds, and especially over not over, months and years, we don't have a lot of evidence. So I think it creates this idea that meds are the only option because it's like the evidence base and standard of care and more research needed in these other areas, but it doesn't really happen. And of course, there's not a lot of money to make in those other areas. So it's not surprising the research isn't happening there.
Yeah. You're not really getting a kickback when you tell someone to go for a walk.
You're definitely not. And the tragedy in that very simple, idea that should be common sense to all of us, if you're feeling awful, and chances are, you have been in front of a screen and you haven't gone outside, the fact that giving someone a suggestion to go for a walk is now actually insulting to a lot of people. It would have been insulting to me back when I was, self-identified with all these diagnoses. Like, how dare you tell me to go on a walk? My
Right.
brain is broken. Do you not understand?
Right.
And so people are resistant to these suggestions because of how much they've internalized this medicalized framework.
How many people Yeah, that's really interesting to me because I wonder how many people really escape that internal, and you've escaped it. It took a lot of work. I say escape like you got out of something, but you kind of did. You escaped
Mhm.
this diagnosis and internalizing this belief that you were broken or that your brain was broken. How many, again, this seems like there's a lack of just studies here. Do you know a lot of people who have gotten out of this mentality once you're diagnosed with a disorder? Are you condemning, is that diagnosis like condemning somebody for forever?
Unfortunately, it often is because the very premise of having a psychiatric diagnosis is that it's incurable. I mean, literally, we are told as psychiatric patients, bipolar disorder, that was my main diagnosis. It's a lifelong incurable condition, but you can manage it with meds. So people are literally being told that this is all that lies ahead of you. And then to answer your first question, like, are there other people like me? There are thousands and thousands and thousands, tens upon thousands of us. And we are all organized on the internet. And most people find each other while they're trying to come off these medications, because
Mhm.
despite the fact that there are 65 million American adults on a psychiatric medication right now, there are provided by public and private health authorities. So people end up coming off too quickly because usually their doctors don't know how to taper them properly. They end up in a hellstorm of what they're
Yeah.
being told is a relapse of their illness. And then they Google around and they realize, holy cow, my doctor never told me I was dependent on these medications I took. I'm actually in withdrawal. How do I navigate this? The only place people have right now are other people who've been through it.
Wow.
And there are so many of us. I'm one of tens and upon tens of thousands of people who are sharing their story online. And there is no research really into those of us who decide to leave this all behind. It's another glaring void. Again, not surprising why, but I'm far from unique for sure.
It reminds me of detransitioners. When I've talked to and interviewed a lot of them, there's no off ramp. And often they're abandoned when they try and find an off ramp. The calls stop being returned. Nobody's the support from the community goes away and doctors. And that's fascinating to
Yep.
me too, that you have all these people and you're doing all of this intervention and fast tracking them and putting them on meds and hormones and all this stuff. And if they change their mind, if you're selling them as this is something that is reversible, if that's the pitch, shouldn't there be pathways to reverse it? Shouldn't that be something that's easy for people to find? Shouldn't that be part of the protocol of when you get into this, here's how you can get out of it if you do decide you, in fact, want to reverse it, which is bullshit, but never mind that. But it should be the same thing with meds. Same thing with meds. If you're getting on one of these psychiatric medications, which does get into your brain chemistry, there should be, it should be part of the discussion when you're getting into it is how do you get,
Totally.
is there a path off of this? Is this just forever? It's usually like, hey, we'll try this and see if you feel better. It's just about getting immediate relief. Can we get you to feel better? And then no further discussion after
It's so true.
that.
It's so true. And even worse is that the evidence base for these medications is literally about 6 to 8 weeks on average. So not only are people not being given this game plan when they start meds, like down the line, whenever it is that you might want to come off, just a heads up, you may need a really long time, i.e., years to taper. So plan accordingly. Not people are not being given that, and they're also not being told, by the way, there's no long-term evidence base for the safety and effectiveness of this medication I'm going to put you on. So it might help you get through this patch. But once you're through a short-term period on it, you're kind of a guinea pig because we really don't have a good evidence base for its safety and usefulness in the long term. And one other parallel to the detransitioner movement that's in that world or in my world of psychiatrization, really, because I think of my experience as about psychiatrization. My whole sense of self was psychiatrized. The way I thought about who I was and how I fit in the world, it was all put through that lens. And then leaving that behind, when I just share my own story, I'm just talking about myself and my own realizations, my own decisions. I am called dangerous. I'm called a pill shamer. I'm called, all these, that I don't believe in the reality of suffering or the reality of psychosis. I'm literally just sharing my story. And I think a lot of people in the detransitioners movement are also being labeled all those kinds of words too for just sharing their stories of leaving it behind. And I think it's tragic because I'm not shaming anyone. Like you said at the
Yeah.
start, if you are informed and you have options, you're given all the options and you feel helped by these drugs, all the power to you. I
Yeah.
completely support you. But you need to be informed and you need to be given all the options. If you're not being given those things, it's not a true choice. Like that's all I care about is choice. I don't think many of us are making true choices here. And I believe that it's our right to be.
We have actually quite a few hands, and so I want to get to some people because we've got 4 or 5 hands up. And some people might have questions.
All right, first I'm going to bring up Micah.
Micah.
Ask you that.
Micah, where have you been? We've missed you.
Speaking of which, I've been on a bit of a weed bender.
Oh, God,
So
weed was the hardest thing that I detoxed from, by the way. And I detoxed from a lot of stuff in my lifetime.
I was a big stoner in high school, and then when they legalized it in New Jersey, I figured I'll give it a shot, and it kind of just shot me. So now it's like every few weeks I'm on and off, and when I do, public Zooms aren't really my thing.
That's probably for the best.
At least you know that.
So I'll share my experience. I'm curious to get Laura's take. It sounds like you have a very balanced view. Um, but I was prescribed them as like when I was younger and very resistant to it. So I was on it for a bit and just kind of stopped at some point. And then sometime it was around my first son being born, before that, I think, or after. It was a stressful time. I was getting a lot of stomach and chest pains. And I went to a GI. I didn't know what was going on. And they ran lots of tests. In the end, my sister just suggested I try something like Lexapro. And I did, and the symptoms like were gone, basically. Um, so I would probably not give it up, even if it was like horrible side effects. Um, but certainly I was not aware of the essentially inability to taper. It's very difficult to get off, no question. And also it like desensitizes. So like I was on a low dose and then the symptoms came back. I kept going up and up. And now I'm on like 25, which is even above the very advisable amount. Sometimes I go back to 20s. It's hard to go down. So it's definitely a hard balance. But it is also very helpful. So it's a tough call. I certainly wouldn't want myself to be restricted in any way. It already is a pain in the ass. I'm also on ADHD meds, and getting them, I have to like time it perfectly in order to get them, or else I whatever. It's exactly 30 days and the whole thing. So I don't want any restrictions, and people do talk about different types of legal restrictions. Certainly, more information given to patients would be wonderful, and more responsibility would be wonderful. But also, I think, in a sense, I don't want to call it a miracle drug, but for me, it kind of was. Like, I was really thinking I might just be like essentially like a semi-disabled person. This was like a constant discomfort every day. So maybe like therapy earlier might have helped me, but yeah. Anyway,
Can I ask a question, and forgive me because I don't really know what they're for, but what is Lexapro for exactly?
well, the funniest thing that they say is that we don't know how it works, but it works in this way. That's what they say about a lot of SSRIs. They're all that serotonin something more. I'm sure knows.
Yeah. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, one of the
Thank you. So they're all the
antidepressants.
same genre. Lexapro, somebody else mentioned sertraline, which Prozac. I think they're all kind of the same camp. It's for anxiety, depression, more or less.
Okay. And then so also ADHD, and then does it, like, if you smoke weed with these things, does it make them better or worse? Or not
It's
at all? Doesn't matter?
different, you know. I got
Yeah.
my Monday drugs, my Tuesday drugs. Uh, ADHD meds are like speed, so it's sometimes nice. It goes well with weed. So it's a good
Yeah.
balance. So at this point, I got a lot of cocktails, taper off, but I also life is tough enough with it, so I don't plan on going off of it anytime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key, I think at the end of the day, you are the only person in the whole world who knows what you need and who gets to decide what's helpful. And so it sounds like you are in a great place with the Lexapro. I mean, what I would say generally, a lot of people, I think, feel helped because when they don't take their medication, they feel horrible. And then they feel better when they go back on their medication. And I think that is a deceptive, that can be deceptive in the sense that if, most of those people don't realize that they're not actually relapsing when they stop their medication, they're in withdrawal. And so when they feel better going back on their medication, it's because they're no longer in withdrawal. And so I think generally what I'll say to people who are in a similar place where they're like, I feel pretty good about my relationship to my meds, but I'm a game here. How do I know if this is, right or not right? If the decision to stay on is based on how you feel when you don't take your med, then that's not an informed reason to think you should stay on it. Like, again, this is where the tapering really slowly, potentially over years, and Inner Compass Initiative, the nonprofit I founded, we have tons of free information and resources about what that looks like, how to manage it, all of it. What I will say is, as someone who was medicated really young and who was on many meds through my teens and 20s, what's tricky is that I didn't have a baseline sense of who I was as an adult. So I didn't have anything to compare it to. I know people who started antidepressants later in their lives, in their 40s, and difference to how they were in their 30s or their 20s. And sometimes they'll say, like, yeah, I'm just too numbed. I've lost some sexual function or this or that. And they can have that reference point. For me and for many people who were put on meds as kids, we don't have that reference point. And so sometimes it can feel like, for me, I think I spent my 20s thinking these meds are helping me because, God forbid, if I wasn't on them, I would probably kill myself. So I need to keep taking them. I had no idea what my life would be like off of them and, recovered from any withdrawal issues. I only learned that by, actually making the choice to come off of them and then taking all those years that it took me to heal. And I could look back in retrospect and see, wow, I had no idea what I was missing. I had no idea what I was missing. And I think that's the bind for a lot of people. It's like, what is my true baseline?
My wife's like that. She was on it since I think 15 when she was going through some stuff in high school. She expresses that same sentiment. What would you advise someone like that? I guess that's you.
Listen, she should listen to her instincts. I think that's, I picked the name Inner Compass Initiative because I do think for a lot of us, especially those of us who get sent into the mental health system as kids, I was being told basically, like, you're crazy. You can't trust your mind. You can't trust your emotions. They're symptoms of this terrible illness. And so I just lost touch with the ability to trust myself and listen to my instincts. And I think that's the thing I'd say to anyone, like, trust your instincts. And if you don't feel connected to your instincts, then it might be worth just making space and time to read more, to reflect on how life has changed since you started these meds. What's better, what's worse, what feels, off in some way. It's why I wrote my book. I mean, not to plug it. I guess I should always try to plug it if I can. My book, Unshrunk. I wrote it.
Apologize for selling you.
I wrote it because I wanted to show what my own journey with this looked like, in case that might feel helpful for someone who has something in them wondering, these same things that I eventually began to wonder, like, who would I be off of these meds that I've been told I need until I die?
Absolutely. Yeah, fun fact, they're also prescribed for premature ejaculation. I don't know if you discussed that in your book, but
yeah, and that alone is that they're not only prescribed for that, they're also prescribed to sex offenders.
what is that about?
And so that alone is really telling. And the reality is, for a pretty significant percentage of people on serotonergic antidepressants like SSRIs, there are sexual adverse effects, and the fact that they are literally used to shut down people's sexual function is really shocking. And there's a movement of people who have been really, shocked to discover that when they come off of their antidepressants, they lose sexual function. And it's called post-SSRI sexual dysfunction, PSSD. And it is so much of who we are as people is in eros, and not just pure sex and sexual function, but just all the creativity and the relationships and the appreciation of beauty that comes out of your sexuality, and to have that taken, especially for kids. There's a great Wall Street Journal piece, New York Times Magazine piece by Daniel Bergner a few weeks ago about this very thing. Like, what are the consequences for putting kids on SSRIs, which profoundly interfere with sexual development.
Totally. I'm always more scared about kids, amphetamines, and adults.
What
All right.
Rude anyway.
Oh, yep.
Sorry, go
one
ahead.
book I always recommend when I was like going through it and I was having like bad panic attacks and I didn't know whether to get on meds or not, and it turned out I just needed to get divorced from my first husband. But I read this book when I've read it many times, Care of the Soul by Thomas More. And it is so beautiful. It is life-changing for me, and it was something that it's something I always return to, and it might be something you just enjoy reading because it's just about like our feelings of just being human in our soul and listening to our soul. And I've found it very helpful over many dark nights of the soul.
All right. Thank you, Micah.
Thank you
Thanks,
all. Good to
Micah.
see you.
All right. Next, I'm going to bring up Philip.
Philip, let me guess. The solution is mushrooms.
Well, probably. Laura reminds me a lot of my daughter, who went through the same thing and was prescribed on Wellbutrin, I think when she was 14 or 15. That messed with her cycle. So then she went on birth control to control her periods. And she was medicated for 12, 13 years. And now she can't have kids. So no grandbabies for me, thanks to our friends, the psychiatrists. But I think the source of the issue is, well, let me give you the good news. She moved to California. She got involved in the cannabis industry. She became the #1 rep for some cannabis brands distributing marijuana to the dispensaries. She was smoking a lot, which she used as a way to get off of Wellbutrin, and then got started to have allergic reactions to cannabis, and then tried LSD, uh, liked it, didn't do it a lot, and then started selling mushrooms, and then actually started a church. So she is the high priestess of the Sacrament Church, spelled PSACRAMENT. And she's doing great now. He has a wonderful husband, and so they're the Church of the Sacrament, which is psilocybin. But to another whole
So
nother
I was right.
You're right. You're right. But I think the issue is that we are ignorant of the long cycles. If you study Indian history, there's the 25,000-year cycles and there's the 5,000-year cycles. And I think as the Earth moves through the galaxy, it goes through different planes. So we go up and down around the galactic plane. Different energies are hitting the Earth all the time, and society changes. And I don't think that a lot of folks recognize that fact that, we go through these cycles. I think quantum physics now is coming to deal with the fact that reality is actually something we render, like we're in a video game. I don't know if you're familiar with Thomas Campbell or Nassim Haramein or Roger Penrose or any of these quantum physicists, but they're basically mathematically proving that the reality we live in is one that we generate ourselves, as if like the rendering engine in a video game. So I guess the answer to the age-old question is, if a tree falls in the forest, does anybody hear it? According to quantum physics, the tree doesn't fall in the forest unless there's an observer. It's kind of the split, the same with the split side, the whatever it's called, the split experiment, where, with the observation, the Heisenberg observation principle. So as we mature, if there's a collective subconscious and we're actually rendering our reality, and more people are discovering these new patterns and energy work, and lots of people have been trying ayahuasca and psychedelics, and if the collective subconscious is changing, then reality is changing. And if if the establishment, the medical establishment, isn't prepared or educated about the way that things are changing, man's hubris says we can fix it, versus recognizing that God is real. If you call God your higher power or a higher power or your better angels or whatever. But, the fact that if you say we're perfect, we are spiritual beings who chose to incarnate in the third dimension. We came here. It was our choice. The choices we make determine our reality. And then say, well, something's broken or something's not right, or we need to take a drug because God and the medical establishment knows better than God what's right. Then, you know, I guess, what do you expect to happen? If you have a relationship, if you have a personal experience, and maybe psilocybin is the way you have that personal experience, or LSD or whatever, but if you have, or maybe just meditate 8 hours a day like the guys up in Tibet, you'll get there one way or another. But if you have that personal experience, maybe an NDE, if you have a near-death experience, if you understand what it's like to be on the other side of the veil and realize that you chose to be here and that everything you're doing is your responsibility, then there's nothing to fix. You don't need to take drugs. I mean, you're here. Maybe it's different. Maybe it's strange. Maybe people don't think about the experience we're having today as being normal. But if our collective frequencies and vibrations are elevated, and people born with autism or ADHD are just the appropriate people for this time and this place in the galaxy as the Earth travels through space, then we need to quit drugging people to try and change them if they're the ones who are supposed to be.
Bridget, could I hop in quickly?
Yeah,
here?
Yeah.
please.
Please.
Yeah, Philip, first of all, I'm so sorry to hear about, what your daughter went through with the pharmaceuticals, and reach out to me if she, if healing my reproductive system post not just a decade and a half of psych drugs, but a decade and a half of oral contraception was a brutal slog. But there are a lot of resources out there, and if those might be helpful. But I want to, as you're talking, just beautiful, everything you're saying is so beautiful. I'm thinking about, what got me psychiatrized as a little kid, and it's that I had an ego death. Like, I had an experience that in retrospect, people meditate to reach. I had this out of body experience in front of a mirror where I totally lost touch with space and time. And I was just staring at myself in the mirror until there was a stranger looking back. And I was like floating in blackness. It was just the two of us staring at each other. It's like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And like, I'm nothing. I'm nothing. I'm nothing. And because I was this 13-year-old girl, like waspy girl in Greenwich, Connecticut, who did not grow up immersed in any kind of like philosophical, is milieu, I
Woo.
freaked out. I freaked out and was like, what, this must mean that I don't have a real self and I'm a robot and I'm like programmed to perform, and oh my God, I'm trapped. My life is over. I'm screwed. I'm not real. And I, of course, I ended up psychiatrized. And I think a lot of us who end up with psychiatric diagnoses are having profound spiritual experiences and or are canaries in the coal mine. We're feeling what is wrong in the world around us, and then we're being told that we are the ones who are wrong because we're feeling intense pain. But our pain is actually a wise response to what's happening. And I think that's where this medicalization piece just can become so distorting, because to internalize this idea that you're defective because you've, had this break with reality, or you are overwhelmed by anxiety or despair, when you internalize that idea of being defective, it shuts off any other meaning making apparatus to, kind of figure out like, what is this telling me about myself, about self, or, the illusion of self? What's this telling me? Modern industrialized society. And I think too, that your point about cycles, like I think we've lost touch with in the cycle of a human life, we've lost touch with so many ancient ways of moving through chapters, and we've lost ritual. I had been surrounded in a village by girls and women who had their own emergences and who could kind of guide me and help me navigate, it would have gone totally different. But there was just a void of ritual around growing up, around becoming a woman. and so I think you're making so many deep points, and like, this is the conversation that we need to be having as a culture, not like you're a pill shamer, or like drugs bad, drugs good. No, like, what is really deeper here? And it's everything you're saying.
I think too, like that comment, I keep thinking about it. Are they medicating away dystopia? They're the young Gen Z kids are lashing out in different ways. They're rebelling kind of all over the world. And you have the girls, the women who are gonna lash out, I think, in different ways. Usually it feels more self-destructive when it's female. And they're just, yeah, I mean, I would be lying if I didn't say I felt anxious and unsettled, and the emergence of AI is deeply worrisome, just kind of unleashed with no guardrails into our world. And I can't imagine being a teenager in this. Truly, I have a lot of compassion for trying to navigate this, because I think the adults are feeling as confused and lost as the kids, and trying to just like put on a face and muscle through.
Yep.
But ever since, yeah, I do think that's why I've been feeling that same pull to go back to basics, and basics being for me like yoga, breathing, meditation, all of the deep soul work that I have to do that has been somewhat neglected just because life is so busy. And today, actually, the yoga instructor, she was on Peloton. She, I had to throw that in to show you just how shallow it is. But she said something that was so, it always is remarkable to me. There's like a great kind of ancient wisdom, be lucky so long as you have breath. But she said, as long as you have breath, you have options. And I loved that. I just sometimes forget to breathe. And I forget, as long as you have breath, you have options. And I loved that. It was like, I have to go back to this stuff.
Thank you, Philip. We've got a bunch of other hands raised, so I do want to try and get
Thanks,
to some other people,
Philip.
but
Thank
that was
you for
amazing.
sharing.
Thank you, Philip. All right.
I love the show.
Going to bring up Kevin next.
Yeah, not much woo in Greenwich, huh?
You can say that again.
Philip always makes me miss mushrooms.
I know, me too. Philip always makes me be like, is microdosing relapsing?
So Unshrunk is a lovely, beautifully written book. I think there are so many things this audience in particular will love about it. Just the way you tell your story in a way that's very journalistic, but it's very personal. That scene with you, or that part of your life with you on the stage in the ball gown with a literal spotlight on you while you're high, to deal with that exact situation is very powerful and moving. But there's also this philosophical and sociological element to it that's was really enjoyable. And but it also led me to this idea that I surprised myself with, which is that I never even considered the struggles of high society from a psychological standpoint. And that's something that I feel like we're not talking about enough. And it exposed maybe a bias in my own thinking, which was, I thought of psychiatrization as an issue that affected middle class down. I don't know if there's a question in that, but that was one of my biggest observations that I feel like we're not talking about out of a lot of the points you bring up in the book.
Oh, Kevin, thank you so much for everything you shared. That means a lot about the book, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. And yeah, and for anyone who hasn't read it, that scene on a stage was my debutante ball, one of the 3 that I participated in. And I think I mean, I knew when I started sharing my story that I would get, you know, attacked. Like, who are you to complain? You know, I grew up in a family of socioeconomic means. I went to private all-girls schools, boarding school. I went to Harvard. You know, imagine the most stereotypical waspy Greenwich country club girl, and I'm literally that. I fucking played squash. Like, it doesn't get more.
Harvard.
But growing up in that world, so you might be surrounded by plenty and never have it occur to you that you might have to struggle to make ends meet and keep your lights on. That reality never occurred to me. So in many ways, I was so insulated. But at the same time, there is it can be a really deeply disorienting and unsettling realm to live in when you are surrounded by plenty all the time. And there's this appearance of achievement and accomplishment and success and perfection. For me, I sensed deep down, like, this isn't real. This isn't what life is about. Like, I sensed it, but I didn't have the language to articulate it. And I do think a lot of privileged kids and adults do suffer and struggle. And you're right that isn't, it's definitely not like, it's, you know, the cis white men and wealthy people who haven't really been allowed to name, like, yeah, we go through our own hard shit too. And, you know, I'm people can attack me for all, you know, for this class thing. I'm fine with that. But it's a really good point you raised. I appreciate it, because it is a huge group of people who are suffering rates of addiction, eating disorders, you know, like all kinds of psychiatrization. It's rampant.
I think
Yeah.
Wurtzel got the same kind of shaming as well, too. Weren't they reviewing her book and saying similar things about her? Because she is like, oh, no, it's so hard to be white and go to Harvard or something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And she didn't come from, like, she definitely had a tough childhood, and with divorce and all kinds of hard things happened. But yeah, for sure, she got shat on for complaining about being a Harvard student. And yeah, we do need to make space for that conversation, because there are a lot of suffering people who, on the to the outside world, look like they have it all together, but they're really in a lot of pain too.
Mm.
Someone says in the comments, suffering is human. It doesn't matter who you are. And, like, yeah, beautiful.
That's what I was going to say. The fact that there is no class divide indicates that it's a universal problem.
Totally.
Thanks,
Well,
Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right. I'm going to bring up Reynolds next. Hi, Reynolds.
Can you hear me? Hey,
Yes.
I feel like I'm in a bizarro world. I've never been on any of these drugs. I got 3 teenage boys. They're not on any of them. So I want to ask the one question. I mean, are SS or SSRIs, do they have a black box warning, or is JFK Jr. thinking about putting a black box warning on them for the dangers that they do pose, especially the kids? Has there been any talk about that to maybe prevent young kids being on it, all the bad side effects? And I got another question.
Do you want me to answer that one first?
Yes, please answer that one.
Yeah, well, so there is a black box warning on SSRIs. Ironically, the black box warning says that they can increase the risk of suicide up until age 24. And it took over a decade of intense advocacy work, largely driven by my friend Kim Witzak, who started an organization called Woody Matters after her husband Woody had been put on an antidepressant for, you know, work-related stress, and he wasn't sleeping well. He had no history of depression whatsoever. 3 weeks later, he killed himself. And she ended up basically becoming, she calls herself an accidental advocate. So she's a big part of why the black box warnings ended up getting put on. And the fact, my sense is that the fact that they end at 24 is kind of like arbitrary, because plenty of adults have had antidepressant induced suicide as well. There are black box warning petitions active right now. There are at least 3. My colleagues, one of them is trying to get one for withdrawal. Another group is trying to get one for PSSD, that condition I was talking about earlier. And then a couple of people are trying to get a black box warning for pregnancy and postpartum risks, because there are all kinds of adverse effects to the developing baby and to the mom. Increased risk of hemorrhaging, increased risk of birth defects, all kinds of serious problems that have not had black box warnings to date. And hopefully those happen. I've been spending a lot of time in DC, and my sense is things are moving. There are a lot of obstacles, but I know people are working hard to try to get those on. And those are just a few of like many more that should be there. And you had another question.
Yeah. So the next question is, I'm Gen X. So I just don't remember growing up, kids in my age group being on any type of sort of drugs. But like my children, they're 17. I went on like a confirmation class retreat when they were in 7th grade, and the amount of kids who were just taking different pills. Like one kid was on 8 pills, and I just looked at it as like, "Do you know what you're taking? Because I don't know if this is right or what." He's like, "Oh yeah, I know exactly what I'm taking." So he started taking them. He's like, "One gets me up, the other one gets me down. One puts me to sleep, one wakes me up. This one does." I'm like, and I didn't know anybody when I had sleepovers, whatever, that people do that. I think it's something generational. I just don't know what happened from the 2000s on to where the medical community said, "Let's just start drugging kids," or parents said, "I want the easy way out. Being a parent's tough. Let me just drug my kid and call it a day." Like what's happened in the last 25 years? Because you just don't see this anymore.
It's a really good question. It really began in the 90s, which were the decade of the brain. The first Bush, made that official declaration, and that saw the birth of what are now these ubiquitous mental health awareness campaigns, where you're meant to fight the stigma and talk about mental health. Those campaigns were funded by drug companies, and they're beginning in the 90s. And the whole purpose was to basically exploit this very valid message that we should be able to talk about our struggles with each other. There shouldn't be any shame in that. But the message really was, there's no shame in getting treatment. And so that created this permission structure and really kind of coerced and pressured, especially parents, to take their kids to doctors for medicines when their kids were struggling, because we were just bombarded as a culture with this message that, these are just brain illnesses that need pills. And basically, if you're not taking your kid to a doctor, you're neglecting them. And here we are, just as you point out, where, again, 1 in 3 kids between the ages of 12 and 17 is on some kind of psych med now.
1 in 3?
1 in 3. It's like it's 8.2% of all children. So almost 1 in 10, but for teens, it's almost 1 in 3 who are engaged with some kind of mental health treatment. Yeah. And those are CDC numbers from 2022. So they're probably higher. It's hard to get.
Let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Is there a correlation between the parents being on meds and the kids being on meds? Like, is it more likely that kids are on meds if the parents are already on them, or are the parents not on meds? Do we have any?
That's a really good question. I don't know. Someone should totally look at that, if there's a correlation. I would think there probably would be, because if you've normalized it for yourself, you would think, but I've never, that's a great question.
Like, I mean, and if it's too personal, you can say that's too personal, but were your parents on meds? No.
They were not. And yeah, and it was a very secret thing. And it had never occurred to them for me to take meds, but the psychiatrist told them after my first appointment, she needs them. And they were like, "Oh, okay." I think they were just like, "We don't want to, we're not doctors."
Yeah, I feel bad for that generation of parents more in particular, because they had no there was they were like the first wave.
Totally. They had
So
no
there-
supports, no resources,
No
nothing.
resources. Yeah. I mean, they didn't even have the internet really.
Literally. Yeah. No, I mean, I completely get why my parents made that choice. I would have made the same choice in their shoes. I completely
Yeah. They didn't have Maha moms to turn to.
All right. Thank you, Reynolds.
Okay. Well, we are out of time. I'm sorry if there's anyone we did not get to. I apologize. This was an amazing show. As always, I want to thank people for tuning in, for commenting, for sharing your story, for sharing yourself, for sharing. You guys get so honest on this show. It always moves me. I sometimes feel like there's just a presence in this room whenever we do this show. And I want to thank our guest, Laura. Laura, where can we find you and where can we support you and buy your book and find you on social media, Losing Our Minds?
And thanks so much for having me, Bridget. It was a great show. You can find me at lauradelano.com. You can find our nonprofit at theinnercompass.org. You can find me on X at Laura Delano. I'm on Instagram _Laura Delano _. And yeah, reach out if you have questions or want to connect more about all this. Oh, and my book is unshrunkthebook.com.
You really are bad at promoting. I was like, I'm going to have to promote her book.
My team gets so mad at me. Like, did you take a picture? Shit.
No, I didn't. You know what's something that was interesting to me when I was writing the monologue? I was thinking about how it's funny to me that like Prozac Nation took off. The anxious generation took off. You know, part of it is like Jonathan Haidt is a known person, so he has that going for him. But it would seem like in this time, your book in particular would have been like a runaway kind of. I feel like there's so many people who are dealing with what you dealt with.
Yeah, it's weird. It's had a lot of media coverage and attention, but it's not a New York Times bestseller. I think people are scared, and I think people oftentimes read the angry reviews of my book and people who have not actually read my book and hear me, anti-med, telling people to stop their meds, pill shamer, none of which I am, and they just assume I shouldn't touch this book. But I think it's people are scared. It's scary to step back and wonder if this
If you're wrong.
relationship you've been in with these pills for all these years might be causing you some problems, especially or your kids. So
Yeah,
I feel we need compassion for.
Yeah, that's so true. That is, I do. Yeah, I was thinking of how you were talking about like the feeling of them, people getting mad at you for telling your story. And one of the things I got the most when I wrote this one essay about being a slut was like people were mad at me.
I remember
they were
that.
angry,
Yep.
and I was like, I'm just sharing my story. I'm not telling you to like stop being a hoe, but.
That was such a powerful piece, and I think I have no doubt that a lot of the anger was because it speaks to something you sense in your heart and aren't ready to really face in yourself. And then
that's like
anger
when
is like, yeah.
It's like when people used to, be in like 12-step programs when I was drunk. I'd be like, I hate you. And here I am, folks. Well, thank you so much. This was really fun. I appreciate you in the world.
It's such an honor to be here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. All right.
Let's wrap it. Just for everybody else, before I do my wrap out completely, we are going to do a Christmas party, holiday party, whatever you want to call it, Kwanzaa party. I don't give a shit. Come join us next week on Real America. I just want to hear from you. How has the year been good? How has it been bad? What are the ups? What are the downs? We're going to wear ugly sweaters. We're going to bring cocktails and mocktails. It's going to be our end of the year Christmas party. So I hope you guys all join us for that. And people who have, spoken up all through this show all year or however long we've been doing it, I have no idea. You guys get precedent for our speaking guests for our Christmas party. And that's it. So I'm really excited for that. All right. Thank you to my guest, Delano. Thank you to those of you who showed up and asked questions. Thank you to Two Way and their amazing team. Thank you to Quest for sponsoring this show. Visit questhealth.com and use the discount code RealDecember25 and get 20% off your purchase. That's questhealth.com, code RealDecember25 for 20% off. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you, Bridget.
Oh, I love you guys. Join us next Wednesday, December 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern for our holiday party. Wear your ugly sweater, bring a mocktail, bring your spouse. Or if you're with us on this Zoom, it's the same link every time. Thank you guys for getting real with me. I'm Bridget Phetasy. Don't forget to tip your server.